to episode 5 of my author journey. I hope everyone had a wonderful Merry Christmas and holiday break and were able to be filled with just love, joy, peace, even comfort if you've lost someone or someone whom you knew is not around this year from last year. I hope overall it was just a joyous time for you to have experienced. But getting started, going into the new year, this episode really talks about my new year and my new transition into a different university. So I said in the last episode that I transferred with a girl. That girl actually was my best friend. We'll call her S because that is her first initial. And so we transferred down together, and when we did, I kind of finally felt like I was, wow, I went to college now. Even though UNC Charlotte was a lot closer than my first university, it just kind of felt like I was like now prepared to do it. Be in college. I think I was just kind of in a 2-year funk of just like, I'm doing whatever I want to do, but now I really want to take my academics seriously. And I told you guys, like, I really prayed to God and said, if you give me a new chance, I don't want to waste it. So my prayer was answered. And I got to transfer, got to start over because within at least the North Carolina college school systems, at least a couple of them, you can transfer and it restarts your GPA completely over, which is really nice in my case. And so get to UNC Charlotte and staying off campus now at this point, but really doing my due diligence as far as academics. Really focused in on establishing a new bedtime routine and going to bed at a proper time, doing the actual recommended time that it says to study and devote to your classes. Like your class may be 50 minutes to an hour 15 long, but then there's like other like 2 hours that you should also block out just for that class, just to do the work. And I did it. I actually took that seriously. And I was also working 2 different jobs. I did not stop working. I was working on campus, actually as a group fitness instructor. That was very interesting. And I also was doing a retail job at Marshall's. So I was working the register, also working the dressing room, just having the time of my life. Like I feel like all the extra responsibility that I was actually putting myself in and through and trying to maintain actually gave me the motivation that I needed to do. So now with junior year, I was like, I need to study abroad still because that's what I want for my college experience. And I go to of course, at the study abroad office. I'm looking at the finances of my program. It's anywhere at minimum $15,000 to $20,000 for me to do this. And I don't know about you all, but I had to kind of, pitch why I needed to go and do something, why this additional cost, which was, obviously not a necessity, but more like this is just for fun and I just want to do it. I had to communicate why that had to be a thing to my dad, who was financing my college at the time. And so in process of trying to figure all these things out and now focused on my major classes, when it came to writing, it was a very writing intensive degree program. I would say my second semester of my junior year, I took 20 credit hours, and I did that so I could qualify for scholarships so that I could supplement some of that cost for study abroad through scholarship money. I wrote at minimum 100 pages across like the different classes that I was taking, the 6 different classes, 100 pages. And my GPA was still very high. It was like a 3.83. Finally, we're getting back into the standard that was always set before me. But as far as writing went, it was a new learning curve. I love creative writing. I can sit and do creative writing, but when it came to policy writing, when it came to technical writing, I felt very drained. But at the same time, it was like, well, this is the pathway that I'm, having to walk in, having to kind of establish for myself, because again, I'm not really seeing how being an author can be, financially stable for me or for my future. And so I was gonna go and be a lawyer, go into law school, go and get my MPA. So it was always gonna be like the next level, but the work and focus was a lot about policy. And that really killed me internally. And I was feeling it killing me internally. And I was just like, oh, I don't know how much like I really want to do this, but I'm getting through it. And so as I'm doing all this classwork and as I'm also planning for my Australia trip, I'm having a lot of conversations with God on the in-between. So I told you guys that I haven't really mentioned my faith beforehand because it was around. Like, I grew up in church, I sang in the choir, I went to Sunday school every Sunday. Even though I was in the environment of church at a very, very young age and throughout my life, even when my parents divorced, church, as in the heart of Christ, wasn't in me. Like, it just wasn't. And I could tell that based off of my actions, based off of my behavior, based off of just my overall attitude and viewpoint of life. Like, I wanted the world's ambition. I wanted the world's status. I wanted the world's pride of life. That was my heart. Even though, like, I tried to be a good friend, even though I tried to help out others, when I could, my heart said, whatever the world's gonna offer me for success, fortune, anything that I can get my hands to and pay for with money and never tell myself no again, that's what I desired. That's what I wanted. And so in this new space, being at Charlotte, and I made my prayer to God, like, hey, if you allow me to transfer and do it, like, I'm not gonna waste it. He didn't let me go. It was like, that was like the first starting point of a conversation being had with God before, I fully rededicated my life unto him. He was like, oh, that was just the first step. Now we're gonna talk about some things. But it wasn't talking about my behavior just yet. It wasn't talking about, me needing to repent just yet. It wasn't talking about any of those things. What he got my attention in talking to me about was my purpose. And this came about because my 21st birthday, my mom got me a book, My Purpose-Driven Life by Rick Warren. And she said, Lee, I read this and it helped give me some focus about what my life should be and how to use the gifts that God has given me to really live out in the earth. I received that book, I looked at it, and I was like, yeah, there's no way this book is gonna tell me what my purpose is, but thanks, great 21st birthday gift. And though I kind of shrugged it off, so my birthday's in February, though I shrugged it off then, I did actually end up taking that book with me on my travel twice. So I did get to study abroad actually in Italy, that the university paid for. And then I also studied abroad my fall semester of my senior year in Australia. So I finally did get to make it to the University of Sydney. I just had to go my first semester of my senior year. And I packed the book along with me, kind of tucked it away, but it wasn't my focus. I wasn't consistently reading it or anything like that. Like, pick it up, put it down for like 4 weeks at a time, pick it back up again. Just wasn't my focus. God was definitely like on the back burner of my life at that point in time. So when I was in Australia, I had gone down there like at least for like the first month. The guy that I was dating at the time also like came with me. So we were doing like the traveling and just exploring and all those things. And I was also doing my coursework because my study abroad program wasn't like a pass or fail. It was like whatever the grade is that you get over there counts to your GPA here. So I had to actually pay attention. I didn't get to just like breeze on through. But once he left and everything kind of like settled down and I was away from my family, my friends, my partner at the time, now it was like, God was like, okay, now let's actually have this conversation. Let's explore this because I'm trying to get your attention. And of course, the way that he's getting my attention is I internally felt the stress. Like, I knew, because I was also studying for my GRE while being abroad, while trying to still achieve this worldly success, my soul is crying and he's hearing it, but I'm not talking. So the way that this started happening and unfolding this conversation was I began reading that book consistently, and throughout it I recognized, and by the end of it, that my heart's desires, my dreams, my ambitions were not actually what I wanted, were not actually a path that I wanted to go down. That was like one aspect of it. But the other aspect of it was a full-blown recognition that God of the Bible, the Christian Bible, is not dead. He is very much so alive and active and involved. And that was very important for me at that point in time, and that recognition and the confession of that led me into a space of my first wave of repentance, I would say, because growing up in the church, growing up in, doing all church activities, didn't lead me into that revelation of the realness of God for myself, for my own personhood. And so in the recognition of that, it began to be that cry out of like, well, what do I do now? I've already walked this pathway. I'm already on these steps. Like, I took my GRE out there. I'm prepared and ready to go back to America after my study abroad is done and continue on this pathway. How do I pivot? How do I change? How do I adjust? And so you're kind of facing all of these questions while you're out there. And in a space like that, of course, when you're away from family, friends, relationships, and everything like that, and you're by yourself, it feels like, oh, like there's potential that I can change and do something different. But then you're also weighing in your mind all the thoughts of like, well, no, let's be realistic. Like, this is just a fleeting moment. And thankfully, it wasn't a fleeting moment, because probably about 3 weeks before I'm like getting ready to go back to America and finish up my study abroad program, it was a heavy emphasis to come back, like by God saying like, move back to Australia. And then you're kind of faced with the question of like, God, is that you? Like, are you really telling me to move back here? And I can say from now, from my reflection back then, it was for sure God telling me to move back there, because I knew my plans. I knew the steps that I was trying to take and the life I was trying to live, and moving back to Australia was not one of them. And so within that 3-week time frame, a lot of things happened as I'm finishing up abroad on the other side of the world. I had gone to Bali, and I went on like a guided tour group, backpackers tour, but it was like with a bunch of like other people. So I wasn't like solo traveling because I met up with other people, but I was by myself. And I ended up having a blackout night that was like, you got done. You're like, you were completely done with alcohol. And I said that because I took way too many shots that night. The last shot happened to be like whiskey or something like that. I like wandered off, and the last thing I remember was that I had gone to the bathroom, and then by morning I had woken up and I was outside of my villa, like just like sleeping, and vomit in my hair. Sorry, a little grotesque. And I was like, I don't know how I made it here. I know that I'm not harmed because like I didn't feel any like, there was no visible bruising, there was no soreness, there was nothing, like, so I wasn't hurt by any means. But that was like the full-blown display of like, you do not need to drink anymore. Like, this is going to kill you. The wandering off and the blackout drinking, like, done. Also during that time, the guy that did come out to Australia with me, we ended up breaking up while it was over there. So there was a removal of that relationship. And I came in contact and proximity with an Australian that I actually ended up going to school with at my first university. We had connected very briefly while I was there, and we came back in full circle again when I was in Australia, hung out, but it was like more than just like a hangout where it's like, oh yeah, nice to see you, cool, and then like leave. It was like, oh no, there's like a lot of feelings here. Like, I hate the term of saying like, oh my gosh, this feels like love at first sight, but it's like, that's genuinely how I felt at that point in time. And and sparks were flying. Like the chemistry was just next level. The connection was just next level. So it's like, okay, we let go of one relationship. We are now embracing a new person in my life that also happens to be now living back in Australia, and going through that. And so now it's time to go back to America, be prepared for that, and be prepared in my language to communicate to everyone what the next steps are, what the plans are. And so get back to America, facing the jet lag, facing, it's around the holiday season, so you're catching up with friends and you're seeing family again. So these are all good things, of course, right? Like I was gone for like almost 5 months. So it's good to catch up and see people, but it's also like my final semester is coming up. Like this spring semester is my last semester. So you're answering the question of like, well, what are your plans? Are you gonna go get a further degree? Are you gonna get a job? And out of my mouth was the boldness, like, no, I'm gonna be moving back to Australia and I'm going to write. And it's kind of like, where did that come from? What are you talking about? And I was like, yeah, I feel like I'm being led back to Australia by God, and that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to go and write. But the thing is about me saying that and trying to align my actions to fully believe it just for myself was I bought a bunch of books off of Amazon about the topic of writing, about how to be a better writer, about screenplay writing, about the discipline of writing, about romance adjective words for writing, about marketing for writing. Like I was buying all the expert opinions just so that I could, articulate and show like in my actions, like, no, I'm really taking it seriously. Like I'm going to do writing. Mind you, I have told you guys, like writing has been involved in my life before I ever bought these books. But I needed to feel validated by trying to teach myself from a professional expert on it, just to, I guess, feel more real. Even though I've always scored high in my writing, even though I've always gotten like the high marks on my writing, in any type of degree or discipline of writing, it wasn't enough. I needed something external to validate me, to make me feel like I'm moving in the right direction in this decision making. And so spring semester was spent all on planning to move back to Australia. So I had to look at a different visa. I had to think about like, well, where am I going to live? So I ended up choosing the city that I was going to live in. So I studied abroad at the University of Sydney and lived in Sydney. But on my second go trip, I ended up choosing to go to Melbourne. So even though I was just in Australia for that study abroad, by my spring break, I had went back to Australia again. I'm a college student. I am not working a full-time job, but I had like a travel credit that allowed me to afford the ticket to go back for my spring break. And then on the way back, I had another conference, a university conference that I had to go to in Montreal. So they paid for my ticket to go back and basically meet my team there, which was super nice. But when I went to Australia for spring break, I went to Melbourne and I just like walked through the city and I was like, okay, here, like I'm going to live in Melbourne when I move back. So that is where I'm probably going to pause and stop for episode 5 of my author journey, and really reflect again continuously about the next kind of like space of my life. I graduated. I graduated with my high marks, my high honors, and everything like that. And I completed my thesis, got an A on it. So I did all the things about finishing up my spring semester. And then 3 weeks later, I did move to the other side of the world all over again. So we'll pick up from that point there in episode 6 of my author journey. So don't miss it for next week.